Hello, hi. My name is Tendai, and Larry, I'm one of the fools that read your book front to back, and then wrote my own. My name is Tendai. It's a pleasure for me to be here, and I'm really proud to take part in this. Another story for you, Larry, that Wakanda movie is giving me problems. These days, I spend a lot of time traveling, and I was in Copenhagen once, and the cab driver was like, "Where are you from?" And I was like, "I'm from Zimbabwe." And he said, "So how close is that to Wakanda?" So I had to explain to him Wakanda is not actually a real place. And he was like, "Really? Wow, okay." So yeah, anyway, thank you very much for having me. One of the things that I'm experiencing when I'm traveling is the notion that you're always in a foreign place. So yesterday, when I got into the taxi, I was talking to the cab driver in English and asking him whether he takes credit cards. And then he said to me, "Why are you speaking to me in English? Do you speak Spanish?" And I said, "No, I don't." So he goes, "Well, don't you think that it's stupid if I went to England and started speaking Spanish to English people?" And I was like, actually, he's right. And then he asked me the question of, why do you guys always assume that the world speaks English? And I didn't know what to say. And the thinking around that kind of struck me this morning as I was preparing to come and give the talk is that a lot of innovators I meet have the feeling that they're in a foreign country in their own companies. It kind of feels like you're speaking this language that nobody really understands within your organization. But what's really interesting about innovators as well is innovators get quite cocky. They start becoming really proud and brash and saying that leaders don't get it, and they just don't understand why these guys don't get it. And that's the same thing that I'm doing when I'm speaking English to the Spanish cab driver. Why am I assuming that what I'm speaking is much more valuable than these people that I'm actually speaking to? And what I'm trying to say, or the point I'm trying to make, is that alignment matters, right? Alignment matters. Alignment is important for making sure that the things that we're working on become successful while we're working on them. Alignment matters because when the things that we work on succeed and need to be taken to scale, we need to make sure that the organization is ready to actually do that. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So this is our language, right? This is the lean innovation language. We use the build, measure, learn loop. And this is based on a cultural philosophy that when you're working on innovation, it's hard to know exactly what is going to succeed. And so you do your work incrementally and iteratively, testing your assumptions as you go, and you double down on those things that are working, and you take investment away or you stop working on those things that are not working. It's a cultural language, it's a philosophy, it's a way of doing work. It's a point of view that the world is changing so fast and it's hard to predict what is going to succeed. So we have a toolbox for sensing and responding, and that's what this methodology tells us. Now, this methodology is a philosophy that's really easy to teach to product teams. You can get them in a room, you can get them to do business model canvas, you can bring post-it notes and all this cool stuff into the room, and people will learn this language, and they'll go and try and practice it in their own organizations, and that's when they find out that their organizations don't speak that language. And that's the challenge that you have. So I want to illustrate this in this kind of problem in three stories. And the first story that I'm going to talk about is a story that's already been told today, and that's the story of innovation theater. If we keep dragging the metaphor of language, innovation theater is when the innovators don't speak the innovation language very well, right? They don't speak the innovation language very well. They speak it poorly, and so they end up engaging in innovation theater. Innovation theater is the misunderstanding of innovation principles and just taking the innovation practice, the tools, the and using them in a way that doesn't really reflect the philosophy that underlies those artifacts and tools. So if you speak the language poorly, you're not a good representative for the concepts that we're trying to spread out into our organizations. And the one thing I've learned as I move through various companies is that the people that destroy the innovation capabilities of their organizations are people who do innovation in those organizations. Because most of them are talking about how they're Elon Musk and Steve Jobs and visionaries and the future and Facebook and all these things, but they don't really understand the philosophy that underlies any of those things. So after they've made a mess in their companies, convinced their companies to spend loads of money on innovation labs, created stuff that nobody ever bought, the moment they leave and somebody else comes and says, let's do something innovative, the leaders are jaded. They don't want to hear from us anymore. They're tired of cool people just talking stuff that makes no sense. So it's really important for us to make sure that when we're doing this work, we understand what we're doing, because otherwise we'll have very limited impact. All right. Then there's the feeling that you're in the foreign country. if you are good at speaking this language well, your organization has different tools and practices for managing innovation. Now, a lot of us talk about the culture of innovation, right? That's something that we talk about a lot. We need to have a culture. Do you know the problem with this company? We don't have a good culture of innovation. And when people talk about culture, what they're really thinking about is sort of some mythical vibe. Like innovation culture is like some mythical creature that comes from the mountain and blesses the people, and then they become really cool, and they have like, cool shoes and whiteboards and Post-it notes, and then the culture. But actually, the culture of an organization is what that organization rewards, invests in, raises up, praises, punishes, right? That's how we manage our culture. Now, here's an interesting problem for us. Just think about this. Imagine a culture that doesn't have any rituals or artifacts. Just think, how would the culture show itself? You don't have any rituals, and you don't have any artifacts. How does the culture work? Now, what we have cracked as innovators are the rituals and the artifacts for product teams. We know the tools we should be using. We know how to do experiments. We know how to do business model design. We know how to do brainstorming. We know how to do all this cool stuff at the product team level. The moment we move up a layer, we don't have any rituals or artifacts for our leadership. So when we go up a layer, the rituals and artifacts that we encounter are ROI, ARR, 5-year business plan, annual budgeting cycles, et cetera, et cetera. And as we use those tools in our companies, we use them on a daily basis, and we forget that those tools actually are a reflection of a philosophy about the world. If you're going to do annual budgeting, your philosophy is that nothing will change in a year. If you're going to do 5-year projections, your philosophy is that the world is going to be the same 5 years from now. Nobody says this explicitly in our companies, but those are the cultural artifacts that we're using, and that's what is forcing us to think like. So I will bring an innovative idea to my leader. Most of you have done this, and they don't have any artifacts or tools to analyze whether or not this thing is going to succeed. So they'll put on top of it ROI and ARR, and meanwhile you're saying customer value. So, well, what does that mean? Many of you working in innovation labs have told your leaders that you did a lot of work and you learned a lot from customers. And your leaders have no way of knowing if you're full of it. Like, they have no way of knowing this because we don't have any cultural artifacts that allow us to measure whether what we're doing is actually going to work. If we promise our leaders that something we're working on is going to be successful in the long term, we also need to give them a sense of whether or not we're in the right direction going towards that long term. We owe it to them as innovators to give them a sense of comfort with the work that we're doing. And so this is what happens to your idea when it goes up. It gets crushed by a 30-page business case. What I'm thinking, or what we've been thinking, in order to align this, if we're going to use build, measure, learn loops for managing innovation, we need to use build, measure, learn loops for making investment decisions. So why don't we just invest a little bit, track progress, review whether or not what we're working on is actually on track, and then double down on those things that work and diverge from those things that are not working. This is incremental investing, right? Now, the fundamental question is, when we say track progress, what do we mean? Now, the cool thing about business, right, is that business is a puzzle that needs to be solved, but actually the puzzle is a really basic formula, which is make stuff for less than it costs you to sell it, right? Sell it for more than it costs you to make it, is another way to say that formula. And so it becomes a combination of delivering customer value, making sure that you have the right solution, and making sure you have a great business model. Again, using Kelly's model there, using Larry's model, you can pick up things from all the different colors. That combination is what actually makes you able to be successful. And as you solve that equation, as you navigate that equation, the more success that you're making, the more money we give you, and we double down investment as you move down the innovation journey and you solve these problems. And then we ramp you up when you're ready to scale, right? And that's alignment at the management level. So we spoke about the problem of speaking the language poorly. We spoke about the problem that we don't have the right cultural artifacts within our organization to make investment decisions in a meaningful way around innovation. So what's the final story that I want to tell you? This is the most heartbreaking story of all. And I call this the myth of the innovation lab. And this is the myth of the innovation lab. And I've met several people that work in innovation labs that suffer from this problem. Most people that work in innovation labs think that their company loves them. Right? It's like, how could you possibly put me in an innovation lab, give me all these resources and all these teams, and even bring the media to talk to me if you're not proud of what we're doing here? Right? The truth is, the company set up the innovation lab as a form of innovation theater at the executive level. They just want to look like they're doing innovation. And they're actually hoping that you don't bring anything back from there that would distract them from running their core business. All right. Amen. Can I get an amen? All right. But what happens, a lot of innovation lab folks that I've met, once they're in the innovation lab, they go to sleep. They get lulled by a sense of comfort. Right? They actually go to sleep. They're chilling. They're doing Post-it note stuff. They're working on cool stuff. They're doing prototypes. They're doing MVP nights. I even met one company that's got failure nights where you get together and you drink beers and you talk about how the stuff that didn't work and it's all cool and everybody's hanging out. Meanwhile, the executives are focused on reporting to the market, next year's profits, etc. Right? They don't care about what you're doing there in the true sense that they care. Now imagine that even as you do all of that theater, you manage to find something that's really successful, something that works, something that customers want, something that's going to make money for the organization. Now you're actually a problem for the company. And I call this the problem of success, right? Because the reason we work on this stuff is we want to move the product into the core business. That's why we're working on this stuff, right? But the problem of success is that once you've got the successful product, the leaders are like, who are you again? And why are you working on this? Whose strategic goal is this on? Right? Because the stuff we're working on is not important to anybody strategically. And the reason is this. We believe in the myth that innovation is about letting 1,000 flowers bloom. Right? So we go off and come up with random ideas that nobody's actually thinking about strategically from the organizational standpoint. And so the problem of success is the problem of misalignment at the strategy level. And this is a study that was published by PwC, where they found that 54% of companies struggle to bridge the gap between what's happening with innovation and corporate strategy. I'm actually writing I write for Forbes magazine. I'm writing an article right now about 8 ways to create spaces for innovation. And at the beginning of that article, I rant about every time I'm working with innovation teams, the only thing that they're politicking for is to get physical space. They're constantly asking for physical space for innovation. Can we get a room? Can we get a lab? Can we get a space to work? And I know this makes sense, but this is what I want to tell you. Just because you have a physical space for innovation in your company does not mean that you have space to innovate in your company. What you should be looking for are different kinds of spaces to innovate. You need a strategic space to innovate, which means that you need space in your organizational strategy around innovation. You need management space to innovate. You need your management to have different tools around managing innovation that are different from the core. You need time to innovate. You need protected budget space to innovate so that your budget is not encroached by cuts from the main organization. There's several different spaces that you need to create. Only when you have those spaces will your physical space then become successful. This is really fundamental. We have to be thinking about these things in this way. And so what we try and encourage innovators to do is that, listen, just because you're in an innovation lab doesn't mean that your company loves you. You are still in the business of stakeholder management. You're still in the business of bringing together HR. You're still in the business of bringing together technology. You're still in the business of bringing together the finance department, the CFO, the CMO. All these people have a stake in what you're doing, and your job is to bring them along with you, because if you don't, they have a stake in killing whatever you're working on. And so we try and encourage innovators to work with leaders to develop what I call an innovation thesis, a point of view about the future and how the organization is going to use innovation to respond. Right? And once we have this point of view, we can then have that inform the stuff that we're working on and not just work on random ideas. So one of the things that we're pioneering in one of the companies that I work with is something that we call a portfolio council, that focuses on developing strategy around innovation and managing the innovation portfolio within the organization, right? And I'm still working on this. It's still not very clean. It's kind of a bit of a mess right now, but we're still trying to clean it up. And this is what we call the portfolio management framework, right? And it's really about how a company can go through a really quick cycle of making decisions around innovation strategy. And when people look at this, they think that the entry point for doing strategy is to come up with the strategy and then start working on it. But actually, the entry point into this is to analyze where you are as an organization and where the world is going. That's the entry point. Where are we as an organization and where's the world going? And then you start making decisions about how you respond. Right? That's when you start setting your winning aspiration, making decisions about where to win and how to play, and the resources and capabilities that you need to actually do that. And then all of that flows into the strategic allocation to innovation, just like we have strategic allocation to SAP. You know when we get those board meetings and they're putting like millions of dollars into SAP or the new Oracle implementation? That somebody's actually making a strategic decision to do that. But there's no boards that are sitting around and making strategic decisions to make allocations to innovation. Not as a one-off project. You know when your CEO comes home and comes to work, and says, I was playing golf with Ralph from Mobile One. And I think what we need is an integration between our platform and Mobile One's platform. Can you work on that? Right? That's not what we mean. That's not what we're talking about when we're talking about an innovation strategy. We're talking about an organization taking a point of view about where the world is going and then deciding how they're going to use innovation to respond from a strategic level. It's a broad guidance, right? But it's also specific in the sense of we're thinking about the direction through which we're actually navigating. But it's not granular. It's not a granular description of exactly what products you should be working on. That you give to the young people that Larry was actually talking about. So this is a case that we feature in our book, The Corporate Startup. It's Denmark's most personal bank. They're called Spar Nord. And they took a point of view about where the world is going. So they studied some trends, digitization, more demanding customers, low growth, low interest rates, tighter rules and standards. All of these things are impacting their business. And then they made a decision about how they're going to respond to all these things. It's a very general kind of, the way they presented it is quite general to the world, much more specific internally. And then they identified their must-win battles, and then these become the canvas through which we ideate. We don't just do ideation on random stuff. Now, here's an interesting thing. How many of you right now have an innovation project that you're working on, and you're 100% sure that it's important to the leaders within your company? Right? It's like 10% of the audience. How many of you are working on stuff that you are having to protect? Okay. How many of you are working on stuff that you're like, I don't know if anybody's going to like this? Right. And that's what we're talking about, right? Which is, when we're doing our work, we need to have a sense that what we're working on is making a contribution to our organizations. We need to be able to identify exactly what strategic goal we're helping our organizations accomplish. Because if we don't do that, we're, for all intents and purposes, engaged in innovation theater. Right? Because once we're successful, nobody's going to want to take the stuff we're working on to scale. So this is the build, measure, learn loop from my point of view for building strategy. Again, just because you've developed a strategy doesn't mean that it's the law. You build strategy in an iterative fashion, right? And so you come up with the point of view about where the world is going. The investment decisions that you're making on ideas, those are the experiments that you're running on your strategy. And if those ideas succeed and fail, it tells you whether your thesis is correct, and you can iterate on the thesis. So imagine an organization in which, down on the ground, there are individuals that are working on products. They're using the build, measure, learn loop to create really cool stuff. They're doing experimentation. They're focused on solving business model questions. And they're really working hard to make sure that they're making stuff that will become successful. At the middle level, at the innovation management level, there are actually leaders out there that are tracking the progress of these projects by making incremental investments and asking the right questions at the right time. So you've got your daily stand-up, your weekly sprint over here. You might have your weekly meeting with your board, et cetera, to make sure that you're tracking. And then at the leadership level, you have your strategy board that is meeting every quarter to review the portfolio of innovation projects to see how well that portfolio of innovation projects is delivering against strategy, to see whether or not we need to either change the strategy from what we're learning or double down on that strategic approach. That is a joined up way of thinking about how we work. Now, I want to say something in conclusion, because I'm done, and this is the book that I wrote, but I want to say something in conclusion because I'm done. A lot of people, when they hear me talk about this, think that this is not their job. A lot of people who work on innovation think that this is not their job. It's not my job to do strategy, right? If it's not your job to think about this or work with your leaders to think about this, then whose job is it? Because if we don't do it, then the people who will do it are people who don't get it. And if the people who don't get it do it, then it's much less likely to be successful. So it's actually our job to do this, right? And that's what and they're saying time out over here, so I have to stop. But one of the things that we have to embrace is that innovation is politics. It is. And we have to embrace it, and we have to work with our organizations to make sure that we're successful at whatever we're working on. So thank you for your time, and enjoy the rest of the conference.